Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Veteran Lang YouTube channel on this terrific, tremendous Tuesday. As always, I am your friendly VA accredited attorney, Matthew Lang, here to talk about VA disability with you. Hey, we got a good one that comes from the comments from about 3 weeks ago. If you haven't seen that comment, I'd recommend going back, taking a peek at it in the video back there. Really good question. So I want to highlight that a little bit more and talk more about that than what I was able to do in the comment there. What are we talking about? We're talking about 38 U.S.C. 1154 and lay statements or lay evidence as it relates to a combat veteran. So we're going to get into that in a moment. Before I do, I always want to say thank you to those who support the channel, view the videos, subscribe, like, dislike, comment, share. It's you that allows us to have this platform to educate each other in order to hopefully one day make the VA disability process smoother between veterans and VA alike. So thank you again for all your support. I also want to give out another thank you to a lot of the organizations and communities that have allowed us to be more a part of their events and their communities. We've, here at Lang's Legal, traveled across Arizona and New Mexico this year, providing legal advice where we're allowed to, education, and even providing small school supplies for kids going back to school. We have a few more events coming up. We are going to eventually wind down here with those as the year gets into the second half a little bit deeper, or that last quarter. But as we do that, and I say thank you to all of those who made it possible for us to help veterans and the public, to give to our communities, I want to give you viewers the opportunity now to help plan out our schedule for next year. We look to expand to communities beyond Arizona and New Mexico while staying in those communities as well. So I give you the option to start putting in the comments. Where would you like to see us next? What events do you think that we should attend, no matter where they are in the nation? We want to put that schedule together for next year and see how many of those places we can get in order to be in the public, give to the communities, and help veterans in those communities as well. So with that, thank you to just everyone who supports veterans and supports each other in the community, and those who support the channel especially. All right, let's get down to it. 38 U.S.C. 1154. So from the comment from about 3 weeks ago, you'll see how I responded to that. So let's talk a little bit deeper into my response. But to understand a little bit more, let's start out reading parts of the 38 U.S.C. 1154 so we know what it is. So 1154B is where we're going to focus in on, and here's in short what it says. In the case of any veteran who engaged in combat with the enemy in active service during a period of war, campaign, or expedition, the Secretary, which being the VA, shall accept as sufficient proof of service connection of any disease or injury alleged to have incurred in or aggravated by such service, satisfactory lay, or other evidence of service incurred or aggravated of such injury or disease, if consistent with the circumstances, conditions, or hardships of such service, notwithstanding the fact that there is no official record of such incurrence or aggravation in such service. So ultimately, VA shall resolve reasonable doubt in favor of the veteran. What does that all mean, right? There's a lot of words going on there, a lot of legal terminology. So let's break this down. What we really have from 38 U.S.C. 1154 is a unique and powerful provision that significantly lowers the bar for providing an in-service event compared to other general provisions for using lay evidence in VA disability claims. So what are we talking about? Let's talk about some of those generalities. What is a lay statement in general? Well, a lay statement in general is evidence that's not required to have specialized education, training, or experience by the writer. Ultimately, it's provided by a person who has knowledge of facts or circumstances, and it conveys matters that can be observed or described by, well, a layperson. This includes from the veteran, from family members, from friends, from fellow service members. So in short, what this really is, veterans and everybody watching, is lay evidence is either a personal statement from you veterans, that describes something about your claim or an element about your claim, which we'll get into a little bit more here in a minute. Or it's what we call a buddy statement from others who can actually say they observed, witnessed, or they can speak to the disability in a way to meet one of those elements for which you're claiming. So again, the purpose of just lay evidence in general, this includes the lay evidence from 38 U.S.C. Code 1154 and our comment, the personal statement from a veteran. The purpose is to use it to establish various elements of a claim, and that includes the current disability. So describing symptoms, their onset, and their impact on daily life. For example, veterans, maybe it's a statement that says something along the lines that I started having severe back pain after my deployment, and it makes it hard to stand for a long time. Maybe it's something as simple as saying, I have a back pain that requires me to take medication daily, keeps me from staying at a long period of time, keeps me from sitting for long periods of time, and affects my employment. Similar to anything like that. So we're talking about what's currently going on. What do we have? What are your symptoms? Buddy statements can do the same thing, though. Think about it. If you have a spouse who has witnessed your pain, your symptoms, the inability to stand or sit, they too can speak to this in a lay evidence or in buddy statements. Another element that these statements can come into play in is in-service event or injury disease. So what happened in service? What occurred that potentially caused or did cause or aggravated this condition? So really what you're doing is describing an event that occurred in service, such as, again, the injury, the exposure, or the onset of symptoms. This could be, veterans, again, something as simple as you writing, hey, I twisted my ankle during a PT exercise on such and such date. Something short and to the point like that. Now, we can also say maybe there was a fellow service member there that witnessed you hurt your ankle during that PT exercise, and they can speak to exactly what happened, and maybe even they witnessed the symptoms that occurred after that as they served with you every day for the next year or two or whatever it may be. So they too can write to what they observed and in a buddy statement. We also have things like the continuity of symptomology. So one thing that we face veterans in a lot of claims is you get out of service, and for whatever various reason it may be, you don't have medical treatment documented. Maybe there's a lot of self-treatment. Maybe it's just common that we would self-treat ourselves for just simple pain conditions. We're going to call it simple pain, which is definitely not that, but painful conditions. You can write a statement, again, a personal statement, showing the symptoms from in-service event and how they've continuously or reoccurred since service until present, how they've been there the entire time. Talk about how, again, you've had back pain since you got out of service, or you've had ankle pain ever since that PT exercise injury, since service up until today, where ultimately perhaps you have self-medicated yourself this entire time, taking Motrin, drinking water, and just driving on, up until the point where it became so severe you finally sought medical treatment for the first time. Buddy statements, again, can do the same thing from family members and friends and people who have witnessed how this condition has affected you and been continuous since service to present as well. So that's generally what lay evidence is. Now, it can be sufficient on its own. The VA often, though, looks to corroborate the evidence by comparing it to other medical records, service medical records, other military personnel records or reports, whatever else may be gathered in the process. They're going to look at this in order to help support your statements, veterans, and your buddy statements, particularly for the in-service event. But if the lay evidence is uncorroborated, the VA may scrutinize it, the credibility of it, more closely. Now, VA, one thing I'll mention here is if you're going to scrutinize it and and say it doesn't weigh enough, do remember that you have a reasons and bases requirement underneath the law, and you have to discuss that in your decision. We find that it's never discussed, or at least 90% of the time not discussed, and that becomes a crucial error on the decision's part. But anyhow, that's a side note just to help you out there. All right. Ultimately, veterans, in your claim, the standard of proof is for you to show by a preponderance of the evidence that all of this comes together, the current disability, the in-service event, and the nexus and so forth. So keep that in mind, because we're going to go into a piece where 1154 is going to change some of this here. So let's do that. Now that we have a better understanding of the generalities of lay evidence and how it plays a little bit of a role, we still have lay evidence in the 1154. So let's bounce into that and see how this goes. So 1154B is the provision that specifically elevates the evidentiary weight. So it makes your statements, veterans, more valuable than just a general situation. This is only, though, of course, when you engage in combat with the enemy. So this is only a provision that heightens your statement when you've been in combat with the enemy. All right, so what's some things it's going to do? What's the differences here? Well, a statement that you were in combat and you injured yourself during combat is sufficient proof. VA no longer is required to corroborate the statement. The law says that the VA shall accept as sufficient proof of service connection your statement, veterans, provided it is consistent with the circumstances, conditions, or hardships of such service. So the most they're going to do that might sound like corroborating your statement is to see if you were in an area where combat occurred. So if you say you were in Iraq or Afghanistan or even Vietnam perhaps, and you said you engaged the enemy there and you hurt yourself there while, say, in a firefight or in combat with that enemy, but your records show that you were nowhere near those countries, your statement isn't going to be accepted as sufficient proof. But if, say, your 214 shows you were in those countries, your statement is sufficient proof underneath the law to say this is what happened. Now, no official records needed underneath this law. So this is notwithstanding the fact that there is no official record of such occurrence. Remember, that's what the law was telling us. This is a significant departure from general claims where lack of official records can be a major hurdle. So the lawmakers, I feel, in this law of 1154 took the idea of going, well, the veterans in combat, they may injure themselves. There may not be a doctor. There may not be a medic. They may not have the opportunity as they're trying to stay alive and fight the mission to treat themselves or treat the condition for which they have, for they'll just have to push forward. In addition, there's no expectation that a veteran that's in a combat with an enemy is going to go, wait, time out. I got to get this in my service treatment records really quick so that the VA approves me in the future. That's really what our law is saying. Look, this is a situation where we just know the likelihood of an official record being created is just nearly not there. So because of that, sufficient proof, the record's not required. Unlike the general lay evidence where we can look for an official record to show that the event occurred. There's also a higher rebuttal standard for the VA. So remember, I briefly mentioned that preponderance of the evidence piece, veterans. So ultimately, again, your burden to prove your claim in generals, especially with lay evidence, is switched when we talk about 1154. The VA, again, has to take your statement of combat face value as the injury occurred in service, again, as long as something documents you were there. Then VA now has the burden of clear and convincing evidence to say that this truly didn't occur. So they have a higher burden and now the burden to either show that this incident never occurred or not. Now, that burden is set so high that the only way I can think of at this moment that the VA is ever going to be able to counter your statement of incurrence is having actually something documented that says completely opposite of what you're saying happened. But again, in combat, that's not likely. So keep in mind the basics of that is a higher burden on the VA. That's no official record is needed. It's sufficient proof your statement by itself in combat that the injury occurred. So let's try this. Let's summarize a few key differences just to make sure we've got this in between general lay evidence and a lay statement from a veteran, or just even lay evidence for combat. So we talked about the evidentiary weight. So underneath the general lay provisions, this can be sufficient, but often scrutinized and ideally corroborated. Veteran still bears the general burden of proof. So if it's just a general statement, you weren't in combat and you're trying to say that this occurred in service, whatever the event was, the injury was, you still have the burden of proof of proving it, and it can still be scrutinized by the VA, and the VA can look for other evidence trying to prove that it actually occurred. Now, underneath the 1154B, though, we're underneath an elevated status of the evidentiary weight. VA shall accept as sufficient proof again for the in-service event. The veteran is able to say this happened, and VA does not apply those general lay provisions anymore. The veteran doesn't have that burden anymore. All of that switches. Need for records is another point here. So underneath the general lay evidence provisions, the lack of official records can be a significant obstacle, requiring strong alternative evidence or continuity of symptomology. So as it can be an obstacle, 1154 for combat veterans explicitly states notwithstanding no official record. This greatly reduces the need for contemporaneous service records. So veterans, if you were in combat, the record shows you were in a location of combat. You write a statement, your personal statement, your lay evidence, to the VA saying you were in combat with the enemy, you were in a firefight, and this is what happened and how you injured your back during service. Then that statement is all you need to say that occurred in service. And then if you find in your decision, your rating decisions, your VA decisions, that VA states that they're denying you because it wasn't documented in your service treatment records, and you provide this statement, I highly recommend you appeal, because I would argue that that's against the law of 1154 in this case. If you would like to appeal, again, always go to www.veteranlang.com to schedule your free case evaluation with us. And if not with us, seek representation through a VSO, other accredited agent, or other accredited attorney to get that help on the appeal. All right, back to it. Remember the rebuttal, the VA's rebuttal on the general lay evidence provisions. The VA can ultimately deny if the evidence overall doesn't meet the preponderance of the evidence standard. So again, veterans, what you're going to need to do, and what we like to do back here, is build your case up. If you got a statement, we're going to look for other things. If you got a buddy statement, we might look for other things, and we're going to build this all up because the burden's on you. You have to prove that that event ultimately occurred. And we have various ways that we handle that. But if you're a combat veteran, in other words, in combat, you provide that statement, the VA must provide clear and convincing evidence to the contrary now to deny. And that's a very high bar and nearly impossible for the VA to meet that burden. So that's one of our big differences. The applicability, again, the general lay evidence provides to all veterans for various elements of your claim. Again, the in-service, the current diagnosis, the continuity, symptomology, and all the good stuff that comes with the claim. However, 1154B is only specifically for veterans who engaged in combat with the enemy and for disabilities that, well, incurred or aggravated in combat. So that's really the difference here. So this provision really is a special provision for combat veterans. So what's the ultimate impact between the two? Well, general lay evidence provision helps to fill gaps in records and provide more personal context. Now, I would say that lay evidence under combat veterans can do the same thing, but it can be determinative for the in-service event, shifting again that burden of disproof heavily onto the VA. So I would say that the lay evidence weighs so much more in a combat veteran scenario than a general lay evidence scenario that it fills in those gaps a lot better. All right, in essence, this is what we've got. 38 U.S.C. Code 1154B provides a strong statutory presumption that if a combat veteran credibly states they incurred an injury or disease in combat, that statement alone is enough to establish the in-service event unless the VA can present highly compelling evidence to contradict it. This is so much more veteran-friendly of a standard for providing the in-service origin of a condition compared to the general rules governing lay evidence in NVA claims. So there you go. That is the additional information I have for you in talking about a statement from a veteran and how it could help them with their claim if they were in combat underneath the 38 U.S.C. 1154 and B there. So keeping in mind the differences there, if you are denied again for a statement you've written related to your combat injuries and services, don't forget there are plenty of us representatives out there to help you out with your claim. It is okay to seek help through a VSO, accredited agent, accredited attorney like myself, or just other accredited attorneys. Please make sure that the person you are seeking help from is accredited, especially if they ask for any money, because there are a lot of organizations out there that are taking money from you veterans, making claims that they are there to help, but they are working outside of the law and they are not accredited with the VA and charging you more than what the law allows us accredited individuals to charge. So that's my public service announcement on the end. But thank you again for the comments. Comments like this really help to put together some additional education and training videos. So I'm always grateful to see comments like this and help out. If there is any topics you would like to have more information about, throw them in the comments. I'm happy to put things together as we move forward and progress with this channel. So thank you again, everyone. I will see you next Tuesday. Have a wonderful week.